Rain didn't fall that night. It attacked. It slammed into the pavement like it had somewhere urgent to be, soaking Mary Thompson's clothes as she ran barefoot across the curb, her sun burning against her chest. Jayden wasn't crying anymore. That scared her more than the fever. His small body felt too light, too still. His breath fluttered like it was unsure whether to keep going. "Please," Mary whispered, though she didn't know who she was begging anymore. "Just hold on." Cars flew past, their headlights blinding, their drivers sealed safely inside worlds where emergencies belonged to someone else. Her phone buzzed again in her shaking hand. Black sedan, 1 minute away. She didn't stop to think, didn't stop to check, didn't stop to breathe. When the sleek black car rolled to a halt near the curb, Mary yanked the back door open and climbed inside, cradling Jayden like the world would end if she loosened her grip. "The hospital, please, now," she cried. The car didn't move. Silence filled the cabin. Then a calm, controlled voice came from the front. "Ma'am." Mary looked up. The man behind the wheel wasn't a driver waiting on a ride request. He wore a tailored coat, his hands steady on the steering wheel, his expression unreadable, but sharp, focused, the kind of man who looked like he never made mistakes. Their eyes met in the mirror. Mary's stomach dropped. "Oh, God, I'm so sorry," she said, fumbling for the door. "I thought, my son, he's sick, I didn't mean." Jayden's head rolled weakly against her shoulder. His breathing stuttered, stopped. Mary screamed, "Please, please help me." The man didn't hesitate, didn't ask questions, didn't look away. He slammed the door shut, locked it, and hit the accelerator so hard Mary was thrown back into the seat. "Hold him tight," he said, voice low but unshaking. "You're not losing him tonight." The engine roared. Rain exploded against the windshield as the car surged forward, weaving through traffic with deadly precision. Mary clutched Jayden, sobbing into his hair. "What's his name?" the man demanded. "Jayden." "Jayden," the man said firmly, eyes locked on the road. "Stay with us." That was the moment Mary realized something terrifying and strange. This man wasn't just helping, he was afraid too. The rain didn't come gently. It crashed down like the sky had lost patience with the city, flooding sidewalks, choking gutters, and blurring the streetlights into long streaks of white and amber. Mary Thompson barely noticed any of it. Her entire world was the weight in her arms. Jayden. Her 6-year-old son burned against her chest, his skin too hot, his breathing shallow and uneven. Every step she took sent a jolt of fear through her spine. "Stay with me, baby," she whispered, her voice breaking as she shifted him higher in her arms. "Mama's got you. Just stay with me." Jayden didn't answer. That was what terrified her most. Earlier that evening, he'd been fine, tired, maybe a little quiet, but still smiling when she'd helped him with his homework at the kitchen table of their small apartment. He'd laughed when she pretended to mess up his spelling words. He'd even asked for extra cheese on his noodles. Now his head lolled weakly against her shoulder. Mary tightened her grip and pushed through the clinic doors, her shoes squeaking against the wet tile. "I need help," she shouted, panic spilling into her voice. "My son, he's burning up. He can't breathe right." The woman at the desk looked up, startled, then frowned as she scanned the clock. "Ma'am, we're closing. You'll need to go to the county hospital." "Please," Mary begged, stepping forward. "I don't have a car. He just collapsed." "County hospital," the woman repeated, already reaching for a pamphlet. "They're equipped for emergencies." Mary stared at her, disbelief and fear tangling into anger. "My son could die," she said hoarsely. The woman hesitated, her expression softening for half a second. But it wasn't enough. Mary didn't wait for another word. She turned and ran back into the rain. Outside, the storm swallowed her whole. She fumbled for her phone with shaking fingers, nearly dropping it as she opened the ride app again. The screen blurred through her tears. "Driver arriving in 1 minute." "1 minute," Mary whispered. "Please, just 1 minute." Jayden's breathing hitched. She froze. "No," she said, panic rising fast and sharp. "No, no, no. Jayden, baby, look at me." His eyelids fluttered but didn't fully open. Cars sped past, splashing water up onto the curb. None slowed. None stopped. Mary felt the edges of her fear harden into something close to desperation. Headlights cut through the rain as a black sedan pulled toward the curb and slowed. Mary didn't think. She didn't check the license plate. She didn't confirm the driver. She wrenched the back door open and climbed inside, clutching her son. "Hospital," she cried. "Please, he's sick. He needs help now." The door shut behind her. The car didn't move. For one long, terrifying second, there was only the sound of rain hammering the roof and Mary's ragged breathing. Then, a calm, controlled voice spoke from the front seat. "Ma'am." Mary looked up. The man behind the wheel was not the driver she'd expected. He wore a dark coat, tailored and expensive, the kind of fabric that didn't wrinkle even under stress. His hands rested on the steering wheel, steady, deliberate. His face was sharp-boned, clean-shaven, with eyes that looked like they missed nothing. Their gazes met in the rear-view mirror. "I think you're in the wrong car," he said evenly. Mary's stomach dropped. "Oh my God," she gasped. "I'm so sorry. I thought you were the ride. I didn't mean—" Jaden's head slipped further down her shoulder. His breathing stopped. Mary screamed. "Please," she cried, panic ripping through her. "Please help me. He's not breathing." The man didn't hesitate. He twisted in his seat, his eyes locking onto Jaden's face. Something changed in his expression. Not fear, not shock, but focus. "Lay him flat," he ordered. "Now." Mary obeyed without thinking, lowering Jaden carefully onto the seat. The man reached back, checking Jaden's airway with practiced hands. "How long has he been like this?" I don't know. He had a fever. Then he collapsed." The man slammed the door locks shut and turned the key in the ignition. "You're not getting out," he said, already pressing the accelerator. "Not until he's safe." The car surged forward, tires slicing through standing water as it shot into traffic. Mary clutched Jaden's hand, sobbing openly now. "What's his name?" the man asked. "Jaden. Jaden," he said firmly. "Hear me, son. You need to breathe." He drove like the road belonged to him, cutting through lanes, timing lights, ignoring horns. Rain streaked across the windshield as the city blurred around them. Mary pressed her forehead to Jaden's. "Please," she whispered again and again. The car screeched to a stop outside the emergency entrance of the county hospital. Before Mary could move, the man was already out of the car, yanking open her door. "I need help," he shouted as he lifted Jaden effortlessly from the seat. "Now!" Nurses rushed forward. A gurney appeared. Jaden disappeared through swinging doors. Mary collapsed against the wall, her legs giving out beneath her. The man stood nearby, watching the doors with an intensity that made her chest ache. She didn't know his name. She didn't know why he'd helped. But she knew one thing with terrifying clarity. Her life had just changed. Mary didn't remember falling asleep. She remembered the cold plastic chair digging into her back. She remembered staring at the red exit sign across the waiting room, counting her breaths to keep from screaming. Then, everything blurred. When she opened her eyes, morning light filtered through the tall hospital windows. Her neck ached. Her throat felt raw. For one wild moment, she panicked, unsure where she was. Then it all rushed back. "Jaden," she whispered, scrambling upright. "He's stable." Mary gasped and turned. The man from the car stood a few feet away, holding 2 cups of coffee. He looked exactly the same as he had the night before, composed, controlled, like he hadn't spent hours in a hard hospital chair. "You can't go back yet," he added. The doctor said another hour. Mary pressed a hand to her chest, trying to slow her racing heart. "Thank you," she said, her voice hoarse. "Thank you for staying." He nodded once, as if staying had never been a question. "They said he came in just in time," he said. Another 10 minutes and he didn't finish the sentence. Mary's knees weakened again. She covered her face, tears slipping through her fingers. "I thought I lost him," she sobbed. "I really thought—" A tissue appeared in front of her. She took it, wiping her eyes. I'm Mark, he said. Mark Harrington. Mary, she replied softly. Mary Thompson. They sat in silence for a moment. Then the fear returned, sharp and practical. I can't afford this, Mary said quietly. I don't even know how I'm going to pay for last night. Mark studied her for a second. You don't need to worry about that, he said. She shook her head quickly. I do. I don't have insurance that covers. I've already taken care of it. Her head snapped up. What? All of it, Mark said calmly. The ER, the tests, whatever he needs. Mary stared at him, stunned. I can't accept that, she said. You don't even know me. I know enough, he replied. And it's handled. She opened her mouth to argue, but a nurse appeared, calling her name. Mrs. Thompson? You can see your son now. Mary rushed forward, barely registering Mark following a few steps behind. Jaden lay pale but breathing, tubes and wires surrounding him. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm that made Mary's knees buckle with relief. She kissed his forehead gently. I'm here, she whispered. Mama's here. The doctor explained the situation carefully. Severe infection, complications, underlying issues they'd need to investigate. We'll need to run some genetic panels, he added. Nothing to panic about, just thorough. Mary nodded numbly. She didn't notice the way Mark's jaw tightened. She didn't see the flicker of something dark and troubled cross his face. But Mark did, because he already knew what those tests might show, and he was afraid of the answer. Hospitals had their own sense of time. Days stretched and compressed all at once, measured not by clocks but by vital signs, medication schedules, and the rhythm of Jaden's breathing. Mary rarely left his side. Mark was there more than she expected. He brought food, real food, not cafeteria sandwiches. He brought books and small toys that made Jaden smile weakly from his bed. You're like a superhero, Jaden told him one afternoon. Mark smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Mary watched them together, something warm and uneasy stirring in her chest. She learned things about Mark slowly, that he'd grown up with nothing, that he hated hospitals, that he never talked about family. She noticed the calls he ignored, the way doctors spoke to him with a respect they didn't give everyone else. One evening, as Jaden slept, Mary finally asked, "What do you do?" Mark looked at her for a long moment. "I run a company," he said. She laughed softly. "That's vague." He smiled faintly. "I like it that way." What Mary didn't know, what she couldn't know yet, was that somewhere across the city, another child lay in another hospital bed, waiting, and time was running out for both of them. Jaden was discharged on a quiet Thursday morning, the kind of morning that felt too calm after days of beeping monitors and restless nights. Mary packed his small bag slowly, folding pajamas that still smelled like hospital soap, checking the paperwork twice, even though she'd already memorized every instruction. No running, she reminded him gently as she helped him into his hoodie. Jaden rolled his eyes with exaggerated patience. "I know, Mama." Mark stood near the door, hands in his coat pockets, watching them with an expression Mary couldn't quite read. Relief, maybe. Or something heavier. The nurse handed Mary a final packet. Follow-up appointments are scheduled. And, "Take it easy." Mary nodded. "Thank you." For everything. As they stepped outside, the air felt different, cleaner, lighter. Jaden took a deep breath like he was tasting freedom. Mark opened the back door of his car. "I'll drive you home." Mary hesitated. "You don't have to." "I want to," he said simply. She nodded. The drive was quiet at first. Jaden leaned against the window, watching buildings blur past. Mary noticed how carefully Mark drove now, every turn gentle, every stop smooth. When they reached her neighborhood, Mark slowed. The buildings were older here, paint chipped, lawns uneven, but children's bikes leaned against porches and music drifted faintly from an open window. Jaden smiled. "We're home." Mark parked and stepped out, looking around without judgment, just observation. A neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, waved from her porch. "Mary, thank God." We heard sirens the other night. Mary smiled weakly. He's okay now. Mrs. Alvarez's eyes flicked to Mark, sharp, curious, then softened. Bless you, she said to him before retreating inside. Mark helped carry Jaden up the stairs. Inside, the apartment was small but warm. Family photos lined the wall. School drawings taped to the fridge. A Bible rested on the coffee table. Jaden settled onto the couch, already sleepy. I'll get water, Mary said, moving toward the kitchen. Mark followed, leaning lightly against the counter. You've built a good life, he said quietly. Mary shrugged. I try. She turned, surprised by how close he was. Thank you, she said again, this time softer. For not leaving. Mark held her gaze. I wasn't going to. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Jaden yawned loudly, breaking the spell. That night, after Mark left, Mary sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the bills she hadn't opened yet. Fear crept back in, but it felt different now. Less lonely. Across the city, Mark sat in the back seat of his car, phone pressed to his ear. Yes, he said quietly. Run the test again. He closed his eyes. The invitation arrived 3 days later. Heavy paper, embossed lettering. Mary frowned as she opened it. Black tie charity gala. She read aloud. For pediatric research. Jaden peered over her shoulder. What's that? Fancy clothes and grown-up food, she said, smiling faintly. Her phone buzzed. Mark, I hope it's not too much. You don't have to come. Mary stared at the message, then typed back. Mary, I'll go. She didn't know why she said yes. Curiosity, maybe. Or gratitude. Or the quiet pull she felt whenever she thought of him. The night of the gala, Mary stood in front of the mirror, smoothing the borrowed dress over her hips. It fit well enough. Her hair was simple, natural. You look like a queen, Jaden declared from the bed. She laughed. Thank you, sir. Mark arrived exactly on time. When Mary opened the door, his breath caught. The dress was deep blue, understated but elegant. She wore confidence like it belonged to her. You look beautiful, he said softly. Mary felt heat rise to her cheeks. Thank you. The venue was a world apart. Crystal lights, polished floors, voices layered with practiced ease. As they entered, conversations paused. Heads turned. Mary felt it immediately, the way eyes assessed, categorized. Mark placed a hand at the small of her back, grounding, protective. They moved through the crowd. People greeted Mark warmly. Mark Harrington. Mary's stomach dropped. CEO. Billionaire. The pieces clicked together too late to stop the rush of disbelief. She stopped walking. You're that Mark Harrington, she whispered. He turned to her, regret in his eyes. I wanted to tell you. She swallowed hard. You didn't think it mattered? It didn't change why I helped you, he said. Or how I feel. How you feel, she echoed. They stepped onto a quiet balcony, city lights stretching beneath them. Mark exhaled. I don't do this, he admitted. Not connections, not this. Mary crossed her arms. Then why me? He looked at her fully now. Because you're real. Because your son reminds me of something I lost. She waited. I grew up with nothing, he continued. I promised myself I'd never look away again. The space between them closed. When he kissed her, it was gentle, careful, like a question. Mary answered it. Neither of them noticed the man watching from inside the ballroom, phone raised, eyes calculating. Or the test results loading on Mark's secure server back home. Because while they were choosing each other, time was choosing for them. Mary woke before the alarm. Jaden was still asleep beside her, curled beneath the thin blanket they'd pulled onto the couch so she could keep watch through the night. His breathing was steady, soft, reassuring. Mary lay still, listening to it like a promise. For the first time in days, fear didn't punch her awake. Instead, something quieter sat in her chest. Hope. The follow-up appointment came quicker than expected. The hospital called that morning. Routine, the nurse had said. Just part of the panels we ran. Mark insisted on driving them. The car ride felt different now. Less urgency. More space. Jaden hummed along to the radio, tapping the window with his fingers. "You coming inside with us?" Mary asked as they pulled into the parking lot. Mark hesitated for half a second. "If that's okay," she nodded. Inside, the pediatric wing smelled faintly of antiseptic and crayons. The doctor greeted them warmly, flipping through Jaden's chart. "Overall, he's recovering well," she said. "But there's something we want to discuss." Mary's stomach tightened. "The genetic panel flagged a marker we don't see often," the doctor continued. "It doesn't explain everything, but it could point to a vulnerability." Mark's jaw tightened so subtly Mary didn't notice. "We'd like to run a more comprehensive test," the doctor said. "It's standard when we see this pattern." Mary nodded. "Whatever he needs." Jaden looked up. "Does it hurt?" "Just a small pinch," the nurse said kindly. As Jaden was led away, Mark's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. "Private lab. Results available." His pulse spiked. "Excuse me," he said quietly, stepping into the hallway. The door closed behind him. Mark leaned against the wall, chest tight, as he opened the secure file. The numbers blurred for a second, then settled. A match, not just compatible, perfect. Mark's hands shook. He'd hoped, no, prayed, he was wrong. That coincidence was just coincidence. That fate wasn't cruel enough to do this. But it had. Jaden Thompson carried the exact genetic structure his own son needed to survive. Mark slid the phone back into his pocket as footsteps approached. He forced his expression into something neutral before re-entering the room. Mary smiled at him. "They're almost done." He nodded. But everything inside him was screaming. That evening, Mark sat alone in his office, the city glowing beneath him through floor-to-ceiling windows. The room was immaculate. Cold. His phone buzzed again. "Unknown caller," he answered. "Dad?" Mark closed his eyes. "Yes," he said softly. "How bad is it?" the voice asked. Mark swallowed. "Worse." Silence stretched between them. "You found another match?" the woman asked finally. Mark didn't answer right away. "Yes," he said. "But it's complicated." Across town, Mary tucked Jaden into bed, unaware that her son's life had just become the center of a battle she didn't know existed. The private hospital wing was quieter than the county hospital. No children's murals, no laughter echoing down the halls. Just hushed footsteps and controlled voices. Ethan Harrington lay in bed, his skin pale against the crisp white sheets. He was 8 years old and far too thin for his height. Tubes ran into his arms, machines blinking softly at his side. Mark stood at the foot of the bed, hands clasped tightly. "You're late," Ethan said weakly, trying to smile. "I know," Mark replied, moving closer. "I'm sorry." Ethan shrugged. "You're always busy." Mark flinched. The woman sitting beside the bed stood. "I'll give you a minute." As she left, Mark took Ethan's hand carefully. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Tired," Ethan said. "But the nurse says I'm brave." Mark smiled faintly. "You are." Ethan studied his father's face. "Did you find one?" Mark hesitated. "Yes," he said. "I did." Ethan's eyes brightened. "Really?" "Yes," Mark repeated. "But..." The word hung heavy between them. "But what?" Ethan asked. Mark looked away, toward the window. "It's complicated." Ethan frowned. "Is it a kid?" Mark's grip tightened. "Yes." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "Does he know?" he asked. Mark shook his head. "No." "Does his mother?" Ethan pressed. "No." Ethan sighed, exhaustion creeping into his voice. "Then you have to tell them." Mark closed his eyes. "It's not that simple." Ethan squeezed his hand. "Nothing ever is." Later that night, Mark met with his legal team. "The donor must consent," one of them said carefully. "And the guardian must be fully informed." Mark stared at the table. What if informing them destroys everything? The room went silent. "You don't have a choice," another lawyer said. "Not ethically. Not legally." Mark nodded slowly. He thought of Mary's smile, of Jaden's laugh, of the way trust had grown without effort, and he thought of Ethan fading. The decision pressed in on him from all sides. At home, Mary stood at her kitchen sink, staring out the window as rain began again, lighter this time. Her phone buzzed. "Mark, are you awake?" She typed back. "Yes. Mark said I need to talk to you." Her heart skipped. Mary asked him, "Is something wrong?" The typing bubble appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Mark then said, "Not tonight. Tomorrow." Mary frowned at the screen. A chill crept up her spine. She didn't know why. She only knew that the ground beneath her life had started to shift. Mary noticed the change before she could name it. Mark still called, still showed up, still smiled when Jaden talked about school or asked endless questions about Mark's car. But something in him had gone distant, like part of his attention was always somewhere else. He checked his phone more, stayed late at work, left earlier than usual. "You okay?" Mary asked one evening, as they sat on opposite ends of her couch, Jaden asleep in his room. Mark nodded too quickly. "Just a lot going on." She studied his face. "You don't lie well." A faint smile tugged at his mouth. "I'm not lying." "You're not telling me something," she countered. Silence stretched between them. Mark stood. "I should go." Mary's chest tightened. "That's it?" He paused at the door. "I don't want to hurt you." The words landed wrong. "Hurt me how?" she asked. He turned, eyes heavy. "I don't know yet." After he left, Mary sat alone, replaying the moment again and again. The kiss at the gala, the way he'd looked at her like she was something solid in a world that kept shifting. Jaden noticed too. "Mark doesn't laugh the same," he said one afternoon. Mary forced a smile. Adults get tired sometimes. But that night, as she washed dishes, she heard Mark's voice on her voicemail. Tight, restrained, cutting off mid-sentence like he'd changed his mind. She didn't delete it. Across the city, Mark sat in a conference room, surrounded by people who spoke in careful tones. "The window is closing," the specialist said. "Weeks, not months." Mark stared at the chart projected on the screen. "And the donor?" someone asked. "His genetic profile matches," the specialist replied. "Perfectly." Mark's throat tightened. "The mother must consent," the lawyer added. "Fully informed." Mark nodded slowly. "But we can't risk emotional interference," another advisor said. "Attachment complicates things." Mark slammed his hand on the table. "This isn't a transaction," he snapped. "It's a child." Silence fell. Later that night, Mark sat in his car outside Mary's building, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel. He didn't go inside. The next appointment wasn't routine. Mary felt it the moment the nurse avoided her eyes. "Is something wrong?" she asked, tightening her grip on Jaden's hand. The doctor cleared his throat. "There's been a development." Mark stood near the window, arms crossed, his face carefully blank. Mary's gaze flicked to him. "What kind of development?" The doctor chose his words carefully. "Jaden's genetic profile makes him eligible for a specialized pediatric study." Mary frowned. "Study? It's non-invasive," the doctor said quickly. "But it could involve additional blood draws and monitoring." Mary looked at Mark again. "Why do I feel like this isn't the whole story?" Mark met her eyes. He opened his mouth, closed it. The doctor continued. There would be compensation, substantial, medical coverage, educational trusts. "No," Mary said immediately. The room stilled. "I don't sign things I don't understand," she said firmly, "and I don't let my child be used." Mark flinched. "This isn't about money," he said quietly. "Then explain it," she demanded. His jaw tightened. "Not here." Mary stood. Then, "We're done." She gathered Jaden and walked out, her pulse pounding. In the hallway, Mark caught up to her. "Please," he said under his breath. "Just listen." She turned on him, anger flashing. "Listen to what? That my son suddenly became valuable to people who never cared before?" Mark's voice dropped. "I would never hurt him. You already are, she shot back. By hiding whatever this is. Jayden tugged at her sleeve. Mama. She softened instantly. It's okay, baby. Mark watched them walk away, every step carving something out of him. That night, Mary sat at her kitchen table, paperwork spread out in front of her. The study, the waivers, the promises. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong. She reached for her phone and replayed Mark's voicemail again. This time, she noticed something she'd missed before. Another voice. A child's voice. Faint. Calling Mark Dad. Mary's breath caught. The truth didn't fully form yet, but it was coming. And when it did, nothing would survive it untouched. Mary didn't sleep. The voicemail played again in her head long after she'd shut her phone off. The child's voice. Soft. Familiar in its innocence. Dad. She sat at the kitchen table until dawn, staring at nothing, listening to the building wake up around her. Pipes groaned. A door slammed downstairs. Somewhere, a baby cried. When Jayden padded out of his room, rubbing his eyes, Mary forced a smile that didn't quite hold. "Morning, Mama," he said. "Morning, sweetheart." She knelt, pulling him into a hug, a second longer than usual. "How do you feel?" "Okay," he said. "Just tired." Her chest tightened. After breakfast, she sent Jayden to school for a half day. As soon as the door closed behind him, Mary picked up her phone. "Mary, we need to talk. Now." The reply came almost instantly. "Mark, I know. I'm coming." Mark arrived less than 20 minutes later. Mary opened the door but didn't invite him in. She stepped back and let him pass, then closed it behind him with a quiet finality that made his stomach drop. They stood facing each other in the living room, the air heavy. "You have a child," Mary said. It wasn't a question. Mark exhaled slowly. "Yes." Her heart cracked cleanly down the middle. "How old?" she asked. 8. She nodded, as if confirming something she already knew. "Is he sick?" Mark's eyes closed. "Yes." Mary laughed once, a short, broken sound. "So that's it." "Mary." "No," she said sharply. "You don't get to soften this. You let me believe everything between us was real while my son became a solution to your problem." "That's not what he is to me," Mark said, stepping closer. She backed away. "Don't." He stopped. "The test results," she continued, voice trembling now. "The study, the pressure. My son is a match, isn't he?" Mark didn't answer. He didn't need to. "Oh my God," she whispered, pressing a hand to her mouth. "You knew. You knew before you ever asked." "I was hoping I was wrong," he said hoarsely. "I didn't plan this. I never would have." "You didn't tell me," she said. Tears spilled freely now. "You let me trust you. You let my child trust you." Mark's voice broke. "I was trying to find a way to do this without destroying you." She shook her head violently. "There is no way. There never was." He sank onto the couch, suddenly looking older, smaller. "My son is dying," he said quietly. "I've watched him fade for months. I would give anything to save him." Mary's anger wavered, but only for a moment. "And so would I," she said, "which is why you don't get to play God with mine." Silence filled the room. "What happens if I say no?" she asked finally. Mark swallowed. "Then I lose my son." The words landed like a physical blow. Mary's legs gave out and she dropped into the chair opposite him. Jayden's laugh echoed faintly from the hallway as a neighbor's door opened. 2 children. 2 lives. 1 impossible choice. "You should have told me from the beginning," she whispered. "I know. You should have let me decide without falling in love with you first." "I know," he repeated, tears sliding down his face now. Mary stood. "This conversation is over," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "You don't come near my child again." Mark rose unsteadily. "Mary." "No," she said again. "Leave." He hesitated, then turned and walked out. Mary locked the door behind him and sank to the floor, sobbing. That night, Mark sat alone in his penthouse, staring at Ethan's photo on his phone. "I tried," he whispered into the empty room. Across town, Mary lay awake beside Jaden, listening to his breathing, her hand resting over his heart. She didn't know what she would do. She only knew that the world had placed an unbearable weight on a mother's love, and neither choice would leave her whole. The morning after Mark left, Mary sat at her kitchen table staring at a blank notebook. Jaden had gone to school, and the apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. She had been trying to organize her thoughts for hours, but all she could think about was the weight of betrayal pressing down on her chest. She had trusted him. She had let herself feel safe, if only briefly, and now that trust had been shattered, her phone buzzed. She picked it up, expecting it to be Mark. "Mark, I want to explain." Mary's hands tightened around the phone. She didn't reply. She couldn't. Not yet. She wasn't ready to hear his voice. Not after everything. Instead, she called her sister, Lila. The line clicked, and Lila's familiar voice was a lifeline. "Mary, you sound different," Lila said. Mary exhaled slowly, fighting back tears. "I don't know what to do, Lila. He lied. He lied about everything. About why he was helping Jaden, about his son. About everything." Lila's voice softened. "Mary, you've always been strong. You'll figure this out. But right now, you need space." "I can't even look at him," Mary admitted. "And yet, my heart." She swallowed hard. "I still care, Lila. I hate that I do." "You're human," Lila said gently. "And that's okay." By mid-morning, Mary had made a decision. She would protect Jaden at all costs. She would walk away from Mark, the man who had made her son's life brighter, but who had also hidden something monumental. She drove Jaden to school herself that day, a tension-filled silence stretching between them in the car. "Mama," Jaden said suddenly, his small voice trembling. "Is he coming back?" Mary gritted her teeth, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I don't know, baby." "But I like him," Jaden whispered, almost too quietly to hear. Mary's heart ached, but she kept her voice steady. "I know you do, and that's okay. But right now, we have to focus on you. On staying healthy and safe." Jaden nodded silently, his small hand gripping hers. Mary drove the rest of the way in quiet reflection. Every mile felt heavy. Every red light, every passing car seemed to echo the weight of her decision. At work, Mary found little solace. Her boss, usually friendly, gave her a sympathetic glance that only reminded her of how vulnerable she felt. Emails, calls, and deadlines blurred into a haze as she tried to push Mark and his betrayal from her mind. But every time her phone buzzed, her chest tightened with panic. She didn't answer any messages from him. She ignored his emails. She refused to look at her phone when she left for school pickups or errands. The more she avoided him, the more the reality sank in. She had made the choice to walk away. She was doing it for her son, for her sanity, and because she refused to let her heart be manipulated, no matter how much she loved the man who had saved her child. Days passed. Jaden's health remained stable, but his energy was low. The doctors had warned Mary that his condition could fluctuate. Some days were better, others were worse. She clung to the good days, ignoring the bad ones whenever she could. One evening, Jaden's breathing hitched in a way that made Mary's stomach drop to her knees. He coughed violently, his small body trembling. "Jaden." Mary cried, scooping him up and running to the car. Her hands shook on the wheel as she drove toward the hospital. Every red light, every stop sign felt like an eternity. When they arrived, nurses rushed to take Jaden from her arms. His small body was covered in sweat, and his eyes flickered weakly. Mary followed them into the emergency room, heart pounding, refusing to leave his side. A doctor approached, reviewing his chart quickly. "He's having another episode related to his condition," she said gently but firmly. "We need to admit him overnight." Mary's breath caught. "Will he be okay?" The doctor hesitated for a fraction of a second. "We'll do everything we can, Mrs. Thompson, but he needs constant monitoring now." Mary nodded, swallowing back tears as she sat beside him. She held his hand, brushing the damp hair from his forehead. "I'm here, baby. she whispered. "I won't leave you." Meanwhile, Mark watched the situation from afar. He had been checking on Jaden silently, every update from the hospital weighing on him like a stone. His own son, Ethan, lay in his hospital room, tubes and monitors tracing the outline of his frail body. Mark's heart ached for both children. He wanted to reach out to Mary. He wanted to explain. He wanted to fix everything. But he knew that if he interfered, he could destroy the fragile trust they had begun to rebuild, even in secrecy. Instead, he sat in his office, head in his hands, thinking about what needed to happen. Time was running out. His son needed a match. Jaden was the match. But Mary had every right to say no. Mark clenched his fists. He didn't know how to convince her, or even if it was possible, but he knew that waiting was a risk he couldn't take. Every moment wasted could cost a child's life. Back at the hospital, Mary spent the night beside Jaden's bed. She watched him sleep fitfully, listening to the beeps of the machines, willing him to breathe steadily. Every time he coughed, her hand shot out to steady him. "You're strong, baby," she whispered. "Stronger than anyone knows." The night dragged on. Nurses came and went, monitoring his vitals. Mary didn't leave. She couldn't. Hours later, Mark arrived quietly, slipping into the empty waiting area. He didn't approach her. He didn't even make a sound. He watched her from across the room. Her hands clenched over her son's small fingers, her eyes red from exhaustion and tears. For the first time, he understood the full weight of what she carried. Not just the responsibility for her child's life, but the constant fear, the sleepless nights, the unrelenting pressure of being everything to someone who depended on her completely. He wanted to help. He needed to help. But he also needed her trust, and he had broken it. The next day, Mary spoke to the doctor privately. "What can we do?" she asked. "What options do we have?" The doctor leaned forward, lowering her voice. "There is a treatment, but it requires a donor, and the donor must be a match. The procedure is complicated, but it can work." Mary's stomach sank. She had been avoiding the thought, the word, the reality, and now it was unavoidable. She stepped into the hallway, her hands trembling. Outside, she saw Mark standing near the entrance, his expression carefully neutral. "Mary," he said softly, "I don't want to interfere. I just need to say something." Mary shook her head. "There's nothing you can say." "Maybe not," he admitted, "but I can't stand by and do nothing. Your son, Jaden, he's the only one who can help my son survive. I need you to understand that." Mary felt as though the floor had shifted beneath her. Every fiber of her being told her to turn and walk away. But another part, an unyielding, desperate part, made her stop. She looked at him, her voice shaking. "You've lied to me every step of the way." "Yes," he said simply, "and I regret it, more than anything. But I can't lose my son." Mary's mind raced. The moral weight of the choice before her was crushing. If she agreed, she would be saving one child at the potential cost of their innocence, of the trust she had tried to rebuild, and of everything she thought she had understood about the man in front of her. If she refused, she risked the life of an innocent boy. Her chest ached. Her mind spun. And in that moment, she realized that love, duty, and morality were tangled together in ways that had no clear path. Jaden stirred in her arms, eyes half open, his small hand reaching for her. "Mama," Mary's voice broke. "It's okay, baby. Mama's here." Mark watched, a silent witness to the depth of her courage. He had asked so much of her, and yet he knew she would make the right choice, even if it meant defying him, even if it meant breaking her own heart in the process. That night, Mary didn't sleep. She lay awake holding Jaden, thinking about decisions that no parent should have to make, weighing the life of one child against another, feeling the full force of her own morality. And far away, Mark sat in his office, thinking the same thing, that sometimes love demanded impossible choices, and sometimes the only way to protect those you loved was to surrender to a truth you could barely bear. The hospital at night felt different when you were a child. The lights were too bright. The silence was too loud. And the machines never slept. Jayden lay curled on his side, thin blanket pulled up to his chin, his breathing uneven but steady enough to let Mary sit back in her chair without panicking every 5 seconds. She watched the rise and fall of his chest like it was the only thing anchoring her to the world. He stirred. "Mama." She was on her feet instantly. "I'm here." Jayden blinked up at her, eyes too serious for a 6-year-old. He looked smaller under the hospital lights, like the illness had quietly stolen pieces of him when no one was watching. "Why do the machines beep?" he asked. "So the doctors know you're being brave," Mary said softly, brushing his hair back. He frowned. "They beep a lot." Her throat tightened. "That just means they're paying attention." Jayden was quiet for a moment. Then, in the careful way children used when they were circling something big, he asked, "Am I going to die?" Mary felt the question like a knife. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. "No," she said firmly. "Not if I have anything to say about it." Jayden studied her face, as if testing the truth of her words. "Mark's kid is sick too," he said. Mary froze. "What?" "He told me once," Jayden continued, his voice soft, "when you were getting coffee. He said his son doesn't feel good a lot, like me." Mary sat slowly on the edge of the bed. "What else did he say?" Jayden shrugged. "He said he gets scared. A lot." Mary closed her eyes. Children heard everything. Jayden shifted closer to her. "Mama, if someone's really sick and you can help them, aren't you supposed to?" The words hit harder than any accusation Mark had ever made. "That's a very big question," Mary whispered. Jayden nodded. "I know." She looked at him, this child who had already endured more pain than most adults, and felt something inside her crack open. "What made you think about that?" she asked. Jayden's fingers curled into her sleeve. "Because if I was the other kid, I'd want someone to help me." Mary pressed her forehead to his. Across the city, another child lay awake. Ethan Harrington stared at the ceiling, counting the small cracks in the plaster he'd memorized over months of long nights. The machines around him hummed and beeped, familiar now, too familiar. His body felt heavy, like it was made of sand instead of bones. When his father entered quietly, Ethan knew without looking. "You're late again," Ethan said. Mark sat beside the bed, carefully masking his exhaustion. "Work ran long." Ethan turned his head slightly. "Did she say no?" Mark didn't answer right away. "I can tell," Ethan continued. "You get quiet when things go bad." Mark swallowed. "She hasn't decided." Ethan nodded slowly. "That means she's thinking." "Yes." Silence stretched between them. "Dad?" Ethan asked. "Yes, buddy. If I don't make it, will it be because someone didn't want to help?" The question shattered Mark's restraint. "No," he said quickly, gripping Ethan's hand. "Never think that." "But it's true, isn't it?" Ethan said calmly. "It has to be someone's choice." Mark looked away. Ethan sighed. "That's not fair to her." Mark snapped his gaze back. "What?" "She didn't make me sick," Ethan said, "and she didn't make her kid sick, and you didn't either." The clarity in his son's voice was devastating. "You taught me that," Ethan added. Mark's eyes burned. Ethan continued, "If she says yes because she's scared, that's not right. And if she says no because she's scared, that's not wrong either." Mark whispered, "You're 8 years old." Ethan smiled faintly. "I know." Back in Jayden's room, Mary stared at the wall long after her son fell asleep again. His question echoed in her chest. "If you can help someone, aren't you supposed to?" She stood quietly and stepped into the hallway. Mark was there, not approaching, not hiding, just waiting, like a man who understood he no longer had the right to push. They looked at each other across the sterile corridor. "My son asked me something tonight," Mary said. Mark's shoulders tensed. So did mine. Silence again. "What did yours ask?" she whispered. Mark's voice cracked. "If it would be wrong to live because someone else was afraid." Mary closed her eyes. "Jayden asked if helping someone was the right thing to do," she said. even when it's scary. Mark stepped closer, but stopped himself. What did you tell him? I told him I didn't know, she admitted. Because the first don't. Mark nodded slowly. Neither do I. They stood there, two parents stripped of power, money, and certainty, connected only by love and terror, and children who understood more than they should. Inside their rooms, two boys slept under different ceilings. Their lives hung on choices neither had made, but tomorrow they would speak, and everything would change. Mary didn't sleep. Not really. She drifted in and out of a shallow half-rest, one hand never leaving Jaden's chest, counting each rise and fall like a prayer she was afraid to stop saying. Dawn crept into the hospital room slowly, turning the sterile white walls a pale gold. For a brief moment, everything looked almost peaceful. Almost. Jaden stirred as morning nurses came in. He smiled weakly when he saw her watching him. You're still here, he said. I'll always be here, Mary replied without hesitation. He studied her face the way children did when they sensed adults were holding something back. You look tired. I'm okay. He nodded, accepting the answer, even though he didn't fully believe it. Then he said something that made her breath catch. Mama, if you help that other kid, will I still be okay? Her heart clenched. I don't know yet, she admitted honestly. But nothing happens unless it keeps you safe. Jaden considered that. Okay. That was it. No fear, no drama, just trust. Mary kissed his forehead and stood. I'm going to talk to some people. I'll be right outside. She walked down the hallway with steady steps that didn't match the storm inside her chest. Mark was waiting near the window, hands clasped behind his back. He straightened when he saw her, hope and restraint fighting in his eyes. I'm not here to argue, Mary said before he could speak. And I'm not here to negotiate. Mark nodded immediately. I'll listen. She took a breath. I've thought about this all night. I've talked to my son. I've talked to myself. And I've decided I will hear the truth. His throat tightened. All of it. All of it, she said firmly. No lawyers in the room. No doctors selling miracles. Just truth. He nodded again. Okay. They went into a small conference room. No glass walls. No audience. Just two chairs and a table scarred with years of bad news. Mark sat across from her. My son's condition is genetic, he began quietly. Rare. Aggressive. His immune system attacks itself. Without a transplant, he won't survive. Mary didn't interrupt. The donor has to be a near-perfect match, he continued. We searched for years. Registries, international databases. Nothing. And then you met my son, Mary said. Mark nodded. And I prayed I was wrong. Silence filled the room. Here are my conditions, Mary said suddenly. Mark straightened. Anything. She held up a finger. First, no money. He blinked. What? No compensation. No trust funds. No scholarships. No security. My son is not for sale. Mark swallowed. Agreed. Second, no control, she continued. You don't get access to Jaden, not before, not after. No photo ops, no gratitude speeches. You don't get to frame this as your generosity. I don't care, she cut in. You don't, he nodded. Understood. Third, no future promises, she said, voice steady. No, this will fix everything. No guarantees that this saves your son. No illusions that we walk away healed. Mark's eyes burned. I would never lie to you about that. And finally, Mary said, her voice softening but sharpening all the same, just truth. From now on, about everything. If I say no at any point, you stop. If Jaden is scared, we stop. If the doctors say it's unsafe, we stop. Mark stood slowly. You're stronger than anyone I know, he said hoarsely. I'm a mother, Mary replied. That's different. She stood as well. I haven't said yes. He froze. But, she continued, I'm willing to talk to the doctors, alone. And I'll decide based on what's right for my child, not yours, not you. Mark nodded, tears slipping free now. That's all I could ever ask. Later that afternoon, Mary sat with the transplant specialist. The truth was brutal. The risks were real. The odds were uncertain. "There's no guarantee," the doctor said gently. For either child. Mary closed her eyes. When she returned to Jaden's room, he was awake, coloring shakily on a pad the nurses had given him. "Mama," he said, "did you decide?" She sat beside him. "I decided to tell you the truth." He looked up at her, eyes wide and steady. "There's another boy who's very sick," she said, "like you. And doctors think you might be able to help him." Jaden frowned. "Will it hurt?" "A little," she said. "And it's scary." He thought about that. Then, he asked the only question that mattered. "Will I still be me after?" Mary's heart shattered and reformed all at once. "Yes," she said, tears streaming. "You'll still be you." Jaden nodded slowly. Then, "If it helps him live," he said, "I think we should try." Mary pulled him into her arms, sobbing silently into his hair. Outside the room, Mark collapsed against the wall, listening through the thin door as a child made the bravest decision of his life. And far away, Ethan slept peacefully for the first time in days, unaware that a stranger had just chosen hope over fear. The morning of the surgery arrived without mercy. No dramatic sunrise, no pause for courage, just fluorescent lights snapping on and nurses moving with efficient calm, as if this were any other day. For Mary, it felt like standing at the edge of the world. Jaden lay on the gurney in a child-sized hospital gown, the fabric too thin, the color too cheerful for what it represented. His fingers were wrapped tightly around his stuffed dinosaur, the one he'd slept with since he was 3. "Mama," he whispered as they wheeled him down the hall. "You promised you wouldn't leave." Mary walked beside him, her hand gripping his so hard it hurt. "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." Mark followed a few steps behind, silent, pale, stripped of every ounce of power he'd ever held. No wealth could buy this moment. No influence could stop it. The double doors loomed ahead. This was as far as Mary could go. The nurse stopped. "We'll take him from here." Jaden looked up at her, fear flickering for the first time. Mary leaned down, pressing her forehead to his. "You are the bravest person I know," she whispered. "I'll be waiting when you wake up." Jaden nodded, swallowing hard. "Tell the other kid. I hope he feels better." Mary broke. She kissed his hair again and again, until the nurse gently guided the gurney forward. The doors closed, and the world shattered into waiting. The surgical waiting room was too quiet. Mark sat rigidly in his chair, elbows on his knees, hands clasped like a prayer he didn't believe he deserved to say. Mary paced, counting steps, counting breaths, counting the seconds that refused to move. Across the hospital, Ethan was being prepped too. He smiled weakly at his father as they adjusted the monitors. "Guess we're doing this," Ethan said. Mark forced a smile. "Guess we are. If it doesn't work," Ethan added softly, "you have to be okay." Mark's voice broke. "Don't say that." Ethan squeezed his hand. "You always tell me the truth." Mark bent down, pressing his forehead to his son's. "You are my heart," he whispered. "No matter what happens." Ethan smiled sleepily as the anesthesia took hold. "I know." Hours passed. Machines hummed. Clocks ticked too loudly. Nurses came and went with practiced neutrality that felt cruel in its calm. Mary sat now, legs pulled close, arms wrapped around herself like she could hold her heart together by force alone. Mark stood at the window, staring at nothing. "This is my fault," he said suddenly. Mary didn't look at him. "No, it is," he insisted. "My secrets, my fear, my need to control everything." She finally turned to him, eyes red but steady. "This is life. It's unfair. Don't insult what my son is doing by making it about your guilt." Mark flinched. "You don't get to break down," she continued quietly. "Not today. Not while they're in there." He nodded, swallowing hard. "You're right." Minutes later, a surgeon approached. Both of them stood instantly. "There's been a complication," the doctor said. Mary felt the floor drop out from under her. What kind of complication? Mark asked, voice shaking. Jaden's vitals dipped unexpectedly, the surgeon said. We've stabilized him, but it's taking longer than anticipated. Mary grabbed the back of the chair to stay upright. Is he in danger? We're doing everything possible, the surgeon replied. But we need you to understand, this is delicate. Mark ran a hand through his hair, pacing now. And Ethan, he's holding steady. The doctor said, For now, the words echoed like a threat. Another hour passed, then another. Mary whispered prayers she hadn't spoken since childhood. Not for miracles, just for breath, just for survival. Mark finally broke. He dropped into the chair across from her, burying his face in his hands. I can't lose him, he choked. I can't lose either of them. Mary looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached across the space and placed her hand over his. Then stand up, she said. Be here. For both. He lifted his head, eyes shining with tears, and nodded. Inside the operating room, alarms sounded briefly. A surgeon barked orders, pressures dropping, adjust now. Jaden's small body fought back with everything it had. So did Ethan's. 2 teams, 2 rooms, one fragile thread connecting them. Come on, kid, a nurse whispered under her breath. Stay with us. When the surgeon finally returned, Mary didn't recognize the sound that came out of her mouth. Both children are alive, the doctor said. Mary collapsed into the chair, sobbing openly now. The transplant was successful, he continued. They're stable, but the next 24 hours are critical. Mark covered his mouth, tears streaming freely. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you. Mary was allowed into Jaden's room first. He lay pale and still, wrapped in tubes and wires, his dinosaur tucked carefully against his arm. She sat beside him, gently brushing his fingers. You did it, she whispered. You were so brave. His eyelids fluttered. Mama, he murmured. I'm here. She sobbed. I'm right here. Down the hall, Mark sat beside Ethan's bed, watching color slowly return to his son's cheeks. Ethan stirred. Did the other kid make it? He asked weakly. Mark nodded, tears falling freely. He did. Ethan smiled faintly. Good. Late that night, Mary and Mark stood in the quiet hallway between the 2 rooms. They didn't touch. They didn't speak for a long moment. Finally, Mary said, This doesn't fix everything. Mark nodded. I know. But today, she continued, 2 children lived. He met her eyes. Because of you, she shook her head. Because of them, they stood there, exhausted, humbled, changed, knowing that whatever came next would be slower, harder, and painfully real. But for the first time since the rain-soaked night that started it all, everyone was still breathing. The days after the surgery passed in fragments. Mary remembered them not as a continuous stretch of time, but as moments stitched together by exhaustion and cautious hope. The soft hiss of oxygen, the faint squeeze of Jaden's fingers when he slept, the way nurses smiled more easily now, no longer carrying that tight, guarded look that meant, prepare yourself. Jaden woke slowly. The first time his eyes opened fully, he looked confused, then frightened, until he saw her. Mama. His voice was thin, scraped raw by the breathing tube that had only recently been removed. I'm here, Mary said instantly, her hand already in his. You're safe. He blinked. Did I do it? Her throat tightened. You did everything. He closed his eyes again, the smallest smile touching his lips. Recovery was not gentle. There were fevers, pain that made Jaden cry out in the middle of the night, moments where Mary pressed the call button with shaking hands, terrified something had gone wrong. But each time the doctors came quickly. Each time they reassured her. He's healing, they said, slowly, but well. Across the hall, Ethan healed too. Mark visited his son every morning before work and every night before going home, if he went home at all. Sometimes he slept in the chair beside Ethan's bed, jacket folded under his head, his phone buzzing unanswered on the floor. Ethan grew stronger by the day. Colour returned to his cheeks. His appetite came back in small, careful steps. One afternoon, Ethan looked at his father thoughtfully. "You look different," he said. Mark smiled faintly. "Do the first." "You don't look like you're in charge anymore," Ethan replied. Mark laughed quietly. "I'm not." "That's good," Ethan said. "You were always tired when you were in charge." Mark swallowed past the lump in his throat and squeezed his son's hand. The hospital administration, however, did not rest. By the end of the week, the story had leaked. Not names, not yet, but enough details for speculation to explode. A billionaire CEO, a rare pediatric transplant, an anonymous donor child. Journalists hovered near entrances. Staff were reminded daily about confidentiality agreements. Mark called an emergency board meeting. Mary didn't know about it until she saw his name on the news scrolling across the TV mounted in Jaden's room. Harrington steps down temporarily amid medical crisis. She stared at the screen. Jaden frowned. "Is Mark in trouble?" "No," Mary said slowly. "He's making room." That afternoon, Mark showed up at the hospital without his usual suit jacket. Just a simple shirt, sleeves rolled up, eyes tired but clear. They didn't like it, he admitted when Mary asked. "You stepping down?" "They wanted me to spin it." "Control the narrative," he said. "I didn't." Mary studied him. "Why?" "Because this isn't a story," Mark said quietly. "It's our children's lives." The board had protested. Investors had panicked. Advisors had warned him of consequences. Mark hadn't argued. For the first time in his career, he had chosen absence over authority. Mary didn't thank him. She simply nodded. That felt like enough. Public fallout came anyway. Rumors circulated. Anonymous sources speculated about illegal pressure, unethical influence, hidden payoffs. Mark's name trended for days, dissected by people who had never held a sick child through the night. Mary refused interviews. She turned off her phone. She stayed with Jaden. The hospital social worker tried to gently suggest counseling, legal support, media training. Mary listened politely, then said, "I just want my son to heal." And she meant it. One afternoon, Jaden asked a question that made her heart pause. "Can I see the other boy?" Mary hesitated. "Why do you want to?" Jaden shrugged. "I want to make sure he's okay." Mary took a deep breath and went to find Mark. They stood in the hallway again, this time without fear pressing in on every side. "He wants to see Ethan," Mary said. Mark's eyes widened slightly. "Are you sure?" "I'm asking you," she replied. Mark nodded. "If you're comfortable." They arranged it quietly. No staff announcements, no photos, just two boys, walking carefully toward each other with four poles trailing behind them like awkward companions. Ethan smiled first. "You're Jaden," he said. Jaden nodded. "You're Ethan." They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Jaden said, "You look less sick than before." Ethan grinned. "You too." That was it. No dramatic speeches. No understanding of what they had shared beyond the simple truth that they were still here. They sat together on Ethan's bed, comparing scars like badges of honor. Mark and Mary watched from the doorway. Neither spoke. Healing didn't mean forgetting. Mary still woke some nights with panic clawing at her chest, checking Jaden's breathing before she even realized she'd moved. Trust didn't snap back into place just because the worst had passed. Mark knew that. He didn't push. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He showed up. Quietly, consistently. When Jaden was discharged weeks later, Mark arranged transportation but didn't insist on driving. When bills arrived, they were itemized, transparent, nothing hidden. Mary paid what she could. Mark never mentioned the rest. At home, recovery was slower. Jaden tired easily. School was postponed. Mary adjusted her work schedule, took unpaid leave, leaned on neighbors more than she liked, but they showed up anyway. One evening, as she helped Jaden into bed, he asked, "Are you mad at Mark?" Mary paused. "I was," she said honestly. "I still am, a little, but you don't hate him." She smiled sadly. "No, I don't." Jaden nodded. That's good. Why? Because hate makes people tired, he said. And we've been tired for a long time. Mary kissed his forehead, stunned by the quiet wisdom of it. Weeks later, Mark invited her to coffee, not dinner, not a grand gesture. Coffee. She almost said no. But she went. They sat across from each other in a small cafe far from the city centre. No one recognized him here. He looked lighter. I'm not asking for anything, he said after a while. I just wanted to see how you're doing. Mary wrapped her hands around the mug. We're okay. He nodded. I'm glad. Silence settled, not awkward, not heavy, just honest. I'm not the man I thought I was, Mark said finally. Mary met his gaze. Neither am I. They didn't promise each other anything. They didn't need to. Outside, life moved forward. Messy, imperfect, real. The storm had passed. What remained was the quiet work of rebuilding. And that, Mary knew, would take time. Love didn't return all at once. It came back in fragments, small, cautious moments that didn't demand anything and didn't promise too much. Mark didn't call every day. He didn't show up unannounced. He didn't try to reclaim a place in Mary's life as if it were something he was owed. Instead, he waited, and Mary noticed. Weeks passed. Jaden grew stronger, his laughter filling the apartment again, softer than before but no less bright. He returned to school half-days at first, coming home exhausted but proud, waving spelling tests like trophies. Mary learned the new rhythm of their lives, medication schedules, follow-up appointments, quiet evenings instead of rushed ones. She learned how to breathe again without flinching at every cough. And somewhere inside that steadiness, space began to open. Mark filled it slowly. He started with texts. How was Jaden's appointment? Did he like being back at school? Mary replied when she felt ready. Sometimes hours later. Sometimes the next day. Mark never complained. One afternoon Jaden asked, "Is Mark still my friend?" Mary paused. "Do you want him to be?" Jaden nodded. "Yeah." "He listens." That night, Mary invited Mark to the park. Public, neutral, safe. Mark arrived early, standing awkwardly near the benches, hands in his pockets like he didn't quite know what to do with himself outside boardrooms and hospitals. Jaden ran to him anyway. "Hey," Jaden said, grinning. "I can run a little now." Mark crouched instinctively. "That's amazing." Mary watched carefully as they walked together, Mark matching Jaden's slower pace without comment, without impatience. Something loosened in her chest. They sat on opposite ends of the bench at first. "I need to be clear," Mary said quietly. "This doesn't mean things are back to how they were." "I know," Mark said immediately. "They shouldn't be." She glanced at him. "You don't get to decide for me. Not ever again." He nodded. "Agreed." She studied his face, searching for defensiveness, entitlement, anything that would signal he didn't truly understand. She found none. They spoke about practical things instead. Jaden's teachers, Ethan's recovery. Mark's decision to stay stepped back from his role longer than planned. "The board's not thrilled," he admitted. "But I don't regret it." "Why?" Mary asked. Mark exhaled. "Because I finally understand what I was protecting and what I was sacrificing." That mattered more to her than any apology. Boundaries formed naturally after that. Mark didn't come inside Mary's apartment unless invited. He didn't discipline Jaden. He didn't try to fix things with money or access or influence. When Mary said no to a dinner invitation, to a weekend trip idea, he accepted it without question. Trust, she realized, wasn't rebuilt by grand gestures. It was rebuilt by consistency, by showing up the same way every time. One evening, after Jaden had gone to bed, Mark stood awkwardly near the door. "I need to say something," he said. Mary leaned against the counter. "Say it." "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, "and I don't expect a future. But I need you to know, I'm learning how to live without controlling the outcome. It's terrifying." She crossed her arms. "Why tell me that?" "Because you deserve to know who I'm becoming," he he said. Not who I was pretending to be. Mary was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I don't trust easily anymore. I know. And I won't risk my son's safety. For anyone. I would never ask you to. She nodded slowly. Then we can keep talking. The words felt monumental. Mark didn't touch her. He didn't even smile. He just breathed out like he'd been holding his breath for months. Later that night, Mary lay awake thinking about what love meant now. Not fireworks. Not rescue. Choice. Choice. Every day. Without guarantees. Ethan and Jaden saw each other again weeks later, this time at a small rehabilitation center courtyard where both had follow-up appointments. They played chess badly and argued over rules that didn't matter. Ethan looked stronger, taller. You're going to be taller than me soon, Jaden said. Ethan smirked. No way. Mary and Mark watched from a distance. They don't see what we see, Mark said quietly. Mary nodded. I'm glad. Silence settled between them again. Comfortable this time. One evening, months later, Mary invited Mark to stay for dinner. Not because Jaden asked, because she wanted to. They cooked together awkwardly at first, bumping elbows, navigating space carefully. It felt intimate in a way that surprised her. Afterward, they sat at the table while Jaden colored nearby. Mark didn't reach for her hand. Mary noticed that too. When Jaden went to bed, Mary spoke first. I'm not ready for what we were before, she said. I wouldn't want that, Mark replied. We weren't honest enough. She met his eyes. But I might be ready to see what we could become. Mark's breath caught. At your pace. Always, she said. This time, when she reached for his hand, it was her choice. And he didn't tighten his grip. He simply held on, steady, patient, present. Love didn't erase the past, but it no longer ran from it either. They were choosing each other again, not because they needed saving, but because, slowly and carefully, they were learning how to stand side by side without falling apart. The first time it happened, Mary didn't realize it mattered. It was a Saturday morning, quiet, ordinary, the kind of morning that used to feel rare but now felt earned. Jaden sat cross-legged on the living room floor, building something elaborate out of mismatched blocks, narrating a story only he understood. Mark stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, carefully reading the instructions on a box of pancake mix like it was a legal contract. Mary watched from the doorway. Mark, Jaden corrected himself quickly, not looking up. You're supposed to add the eggs before the milk. Mark paused, then nodded solemnly. Important clarification. Jaden grinned. Mary's chest tightened, not with fear, not with jealousy, but with a strange, quiet awareness. This wasn't replacement. It wasn't erasure. It was something else entirely. Later, when Mark left, Mary tucked Jaden into bed. You okay? She asked gently. Jaden nodded. I like when Mark's here. Mary waited. He doesn't try to be my dad, Jaden added. That's good. Mary smiled, brushing his hair back. Yeah, that's good. Family didn't announce itself. It evolved. Ethan came to visit for the first time a few weeks later. Mark asked first. Carefully, no pressure. Mary said yes, with boundaries. Ethan arrived holding a small bag and a nervous smile. He looked healthier now, stronger, but still carried the fragility of a child who knew his body had once betrayed him. Jaden opened the door himself. You're taller, Jaden said. Ethan smirked. You're louder. They stared at each other, then laughed. Mary watched them settle into the living room, their conversation awkward at first, then easy, trading stories about hospitals, about terrible food, about nurses who sang off-key. They spoke a shared language Mary had never learned. Later, while the boys played video games, Mark stood beside Mary near the window. You don't have to let this happen, he said quietly. I know, she replied, but I want to see where it goes. He nodded. Me too. There were missteps. Ethan once asked Mary if she was going to be his new mom. The question froze the room. Mary knelt in front of him, voice gentle but firm. You already have a mom. And no one replaces her. Ethan swallowed, nodding. I didn't mean. I know what you meant, she said. We're just figuring things out. Mark watched the exchange with something close to awe. Later he told Mary, thank you for not pretending this is simpler than it is. It's not a fairy tale, she replied. It's real life. They didn't move in together. They didn't merge calendars or bank accounts or futures. They shared moments instead. Movie nights where Ethan stayed over. School events where Mark sat a row behind Mary. Doctor appointments where Mary and Mark exchanged quiet looks across sterile rooms. And slowly, something solid formed. Not a perfect family, a redefined one. Jaden grew bolder. One afternoon he asked, can Ethan come to my birthday? Mary hesitated, then nodded. If his dad says yes. Mark didn't hesitate at all. Ethan brought a gift he'd saved allowance for. Jaden hugged him so hard Mary had to blink back tears. They blew out candles together. 2 boys. 1 wish. Mary didn't ask what it was. Mark noticed things too. The way Mary no longer stiffened when he stood close. The way she trusted him alone with Jaden, but not blindly. The way she corrected him when he crossed a line and praised him when he listened. This wasn't love built on need. It was love built on choice. One evening, after the boys had fallen asleep on opposite ends of the couch, Mark and Mary sat quietly, sharing a blanket. I don't know what this becomes, Mark said. Mary nodded. Neither do I. But, he added, whatever it is, I want to do it right. She turned to him. Then we keep going slow. He smiled softly. As slow as you need. Family, Mary realized, wasn't about blood or vows or even permanence. It was about responsibility without ownership, presence without possession. And for the first time in a long time, the word future didn't scare her. Chapter 19. What Love Really Costs. Years later, the article would be written differently than Mark expected. Not about power, not about scandal, not even about redemption. It was about restraint. The headline read, When Not Using Power Becomes the Strongest Choice. Mark read it quietly in his office, the city stretching endlessly beyond the windows. He wasn't CEO anymore, not in the way he once was. He still had influence, resources, reach, but he used them differently now. He closed the article and looked at the photo on his desk. 4 people. Not posed, not perfect, real. Mary hadn't changed in the way stories like to describe. She hadn't softened into something smaller. She had sharpened, more confident, more grounded, less willing to compromise truth for comfort. She still didn't forgive easily. She didn't forget, but she loved, honestly. Jaden grew taller, stronger, curious in the way children who survived something often were. He asked hard questions. He challenged adults. He understood fairness in a way that startled teachers. Ethan grew too, less fragile, more mischievous, fiercely protective of Jaden without quite knowing why. They argued like brothers. They defended each other like family. Mary and Mark never married quickly. They didn't announce milestones. They didn't chase symbols. They built something quieter, on consent, on transparency, on the understanding that love wasn't proven by sacrifice alone, but by respect. One night, years after the surgery, Mary and Mark sat on the porch while the boys slept inside. Do you ever regret it? Mark asked softly. Mary didn't ask what it meant. No, she said, but I don't romanticize it either. Mark nodded. Neither do I. What we did, she continued, wasn't noble. It was necessary and terrifying, he added. She smiled faintly. And human. Mark exhaled. I used to think love meant winning, securing, protecting at all costs. And now I think love means asking before you take, he said, and accepting the answer, even when it breaks you. Mary reached for his hand. This time, he squeezed back. Inside, Jaden shifted in his sleep, murmuring something unintelligible. Ethan laughed softly in the next room. Life continued. Not perfect, but honest. Mark Harrington's legacy wasn't a company or a fortune. It was a choice he made when no one was watching. Mary Thompson's legacy wasn't sacrifice. It was sovereignty. And the children, they were living proof that love, when chosen freely and used responsibly, didn't destroy. It healed, not all at once, not without scars, but enough to breathe, enough to stay, enough to build something that lasted, not because it was easy, but because it was true. May we learn to pause before we judge, before we take, before we decide for others what only love has the right to decide. May every parent who has sat beside a hospital bed know that their fear is not weakness, their tears are not failure, and their love is already enough. May those who carry power learn restraint. May those who carry pain find rest. May those who were forced to choose between impossible options be met with mercy by others and by themselves. May the children who survive grow without guilt for the lives they saved. May the children who were saved grow without forgetting the hands that reached for them in the dark. And when the storm comes again, as it always does, may we remember this truth, that love is not proven by what we control, but by what we are willing to surrender when control would cost us our humanity. Amen. Life will not always be fair. It will not always give you time to prepare. Sometimes it will place you at the center of a choice you never asked for and measure you not by your comfort, but by your courage. When that moment comes, remember this. You do not have to be perfect to be brave. You do not have to be fearless to do what is right. And you do not have to save the whole world to change one life forever. Love is not loud. It does not announce itself. It shows up quietly, holds on when it hurts, and chooses truth even when truth is costly. If you are reading this while tired, afraid, or unsure, know that surviving does not make you selfish. Choosing boundaries does not make you cruel. And opening your heart again, slowly and carefully, does not make you weak. It makes you human. And sometimes, being human, with honesty, courage, and compassion, is the greatest legacy you will ever leave behind.